Hello, music lovers. Welcome back. So, I've had a few chord questions of you guys, and I was thinking, haven't you guys seen my chord video? But then I realized the last video I did that really covered chords well was this one. A thumbnail called 60 Chill Chords and a picture of Alex Rome. Because that was originally a response to a comment on one of his videos. You can see why an EDM producer wouldn't click on that. So here is Chords 2, Electric Boogaloo, and we are going to do it the proper way. We are going to learn our chords from some of the dance classics. And while we're at it, I'm going to show you a cool trick that Ride on Time, Le Voie Le Soleil, and Levels all have in common. Let's go. Okay, a quick crash course in chords. Say that 3 times fast. The first thing we need to know is our key and our scale. Luckily for us, our first track, Ride on Time, is in the key of A, and the scale is minor. A minor. Why is that lucky? It's because A minor is all the white notes from A. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's all 7 notes from A minor. Nice and simple. What is a chord? A chord is just multiple notes at once. The standard building blocks of chords are called triads. Tri meaning 3 notes, and we do it this way. We start with A, obviously, miss the second one, press the third one, miss the fourth one, press the fifth one. There we go. That's chord 1 in A minor. Sounds a bit muddy. Let's put this up the octave. So that's chord 1, A minor. And as you might imagine, there is a chord for each of the 7 notes in the key. So this would be chord 2 in A minor. This is chord 3, and so on and so on. Okay, there's all 7 chords for A minor, all 7 triads. Okay, let's build Ride on Time. We start on chord 1. The next chord is chord 7. And then it's chord 6. Back to chord 7. So it's a 1, 7, 6, 7. In this case, it's 1 chord for every 2 beats. Like that. Let's build our chord. Press 1, miss 1, press 1, miss 1, press 1. Do the same for these. So there's your 1, 7, 6, 7 in A minor. Nice and simple. Okay, let's do the rhythm. I'm going to shorten all these to 16th notes. We start with 2 stabs of chord 1 on the kick drums. Our first chord 7 is on the kick as well. Then we have our first syncopated chord. That just means it's not on the beat. Now our chord 6 comes early, just before this bar. Chords don't have to start on any particular beat. There's no rules there. Next up, we have a little run of 3 eighth notes. That's just referring to how far apart they are. If these are 16ths, these are 8ths, okay? Then chord 7 has 2 eighth notes as well, and 1 syncopated, just after the bar. Starting to sound familiar. Okay, so the first lesson Ride on Time is going to teach us is something called chord voicing. If you don't know what that is, hey Google, what's chord voicing?
In music theory, voicing refers to 2 closely related concepts: how a musician or group distributes, or spaces, notes and chords on one or more instruments, the simultaneous vertical placement of notes in relation to each other. This relates to the concepts of spacing and doubling. It includes the instrumentation and vertical spacing and ordering of the musical notes in a chord.
Okay, forget that. What she meant to say was, It's when you change the order of the notes. In other words, if I was to take this A and move it down the octave, that would be a different voicing to this one. That's all it is. It can also include adding more of the same notes. So these would be two different voicings of chord 1. Still chord 1, just a different voicing. Everyone on board so far. Good, good. So one of the ways this riff voices the chord is with this left-hand bass part, if you will. So we have 2 here. And what you're going to notice is most of these go in between the chord stabs above. What I like to call the good old 90s stagger. We have 2 here as well. These go in between. We mark chord 6 at the beginning of this bar. And we let the right hand take over, as it were. 2 more in betweenies at the end here. And that sounds like... And there you have it, that classic bouncy Italo piano house vibes. Now, another type of voicing this riff uses is to take note 1 here and we place this up the octave, creating a type of top melody. And you'll notice as we look at all the riffs today, this is going to be the running theme. This chord and all these chord 6s here, same deal, the low note is revoiced to the top. And that creates this melody. Now, this is a special type of voicing, because normally chord 6 would have note 6 at the bottom, what we call the root note. Like this. So there's what the normal triad for chord 6 would usually look like. So when the root note is no longer at the bottom, we call this an inversion. So in other words, voicing is when you change the order of the notes, and if you mess with the bottom note, that's an inversion. Let's finish the riff. Back to that top melody I was talking about. The rest comes from here, by going up 1 note. This also goes up 1 note. That creates this flowing line here. And the finishing touches. This note goes up 1, temporarily creating a chord 3. Let me explain that. If we build a chord from note 3, a C, E, and a G, that's chord 3 in A minor. If you look here, we've got C, E, and G. So that's an inversion of chord 3, temporarily. And the only other change is a little melodic flick here in the bass. Little jump to note 3. Note 3 still being in chord 1, of course. There we have it, right on time. Sounding like this with the full arrangement. Now, we can't not mention the bass line. So if we look here, obviously, note 1, lots of syncopation. Then this melodic element, you could call this an arpeggio of chord 1, because that's just the notes of chord 1 broken up. Now, by this point, the upper chord has moved to chord 7, but the bass is kind of ignoring that. Instead, prioritizing the melodic side of things. And we do move to 6. Same pattern with the syncopation. We do change to chord 7 here. But these notes, these are actually note 5. And note 5 is not in chord 7. Let me show you. That's notes 7, 2, and 4. Note 5 is not in there. So this is actually creating a kind of chord 5 at this point. Remember earlier how we talked about the root note of a chord, the lowest one? Well, our bass part here is the lowest, so that has effectively forced a type of chord 5 here. And then the second half is the same, except for the last turnaround, which is an arpeggio of chord 5. This same kind of melody again. Let's solo the bass and drums. There are plenty of sections in the arrangement that don't run the piano. Instead, they just have this. The gated organ. So there's Ride on Time, or Right on Time, as it should have been called if a certain Italian producer hadn't misheard the lyrics. I'm allowed to mock Black Box slightly, aren't I? They did take Lolita Holloway's vocals without permission or credit. Still, a classic though. Okay, Voie Le Soleil by Subliminal Cuts. This track is actually in C# minor, but for visual simplicity, I'll be keeping it in A. It's playing back in C# though, so you're hearing it in the same key as the original. Again, we are starting on chord 1. We're going to do rhythm next, not the progression. You will see why in a minute. The rhythm is this. The stagger is back. We have the bass note and upper chord on 8th notes. Like that. Another bass note and a syncopated pair of upper chords. Then a syncopated bass note. And our last pair of triads there. So there's chord 1 and its rhythm. And the chord lesson we learn from Voie Le Soleil is extensions. Up until now, we've been dealing with mostly triads. As we saw at the beginning, they are made up of the root note, a note that's 3 above that, and then another that's 5 above that. All chord extensions is exactly how they sound. We extend upwards. And the first extension of a chord is its 7th, because the root is our first. Then we have a 3rd above that, a 5th above that, and then we reach 7. Sounds like this. The next is a 9th. Here's how that sounds. Yes, this is note 2, but we call it a 9th when it's built on top of a chord, instead of calling it a 2nd, which would be down here. Because the other notes are present underneath, it's a 9th. You can have an 11th chord if you want. Etc., etc. So remember earlier how I said the running theme between all these tracks is top melodies? Well, Voie Le Soleil creates its top melody with extensions. Let's turn the velocity up so they stand out. And it's as simple as this. We start with a 7th, then up one more, which the more eagle-eyed among you may notice is not an extension, it's just a revoicing of chord 1, because that is a repeat of note 1. Then we go up one more to the 9th, except we call this an add 9. A 9th chord would infer that the 7th is still present. So this is called an add 9. So here is our top melody. Now, the reason I didn't program the progression first is because there's a really simple trick this riff uses. Our chord progression is going to be a 1, 6, 4, 5. If I turn on Ableton's scale function here to A minor, now whenever I move anything, it's going to force it onto the white notes. So if I make a copy of this to 6, 4, and 5, that's the riff done. Let's add some more nostalgia. So there you go, an example of a top melody made out of extensions. Let's go next. Okay, levels. Levels is also in C# minor, but again, same deal. I'm going to show it you in A, but you're listening to it back in its original key. So progression on levels is a 1, 3, 7, 6. Let's build our chords. Same for these. Just like that. Let's get the rhythm in. There's no rhythms faster than eighth notes in this riff, so might as well set my grid to eighths. So we start with a group of 3. And there's a gap here. And last but not least, another early move to chord 6. Fairly recognizable already. So how did Avicii create his top melody? Well, it's with both voicings and extensions, but also something called alterations. We'll come to those last. First, voicing. We take our middle note, and that goes on the top. Like that. We can do that for all of them. A very common voicing for this era of dance music, this. The first melodic element is we keep this common tone between the first 2 chords. You can see it's the same as the root. In fact, you'll find the overall premise of this melody is to stick around this one note. You might be able to hear that shouldn't go down, it goes up. So we revoice that. As you'll see, that note is already below. So that's a revoicing. We have an early move here. So here is what I was talking about. This is an alteration. So what is an alteration? First, let me draw you our normal triad here. So as we learned earlier, a normal triad contains notes 1, 3, and 5 relative to its root note, yes? Well, if you mess with that middle note, note 3, and move it to either 4 or 2, it becomes what we call a suspension. So this was a 3, now it's moved up to 4, so this becomes a suspended 4th. So it's still chord 7, but it's chord 7 suspended 4th. Now the new voicing for this last chord is this goes up the octave. As you may remember, we have this great turnaround falling melody, which goes like this. So what we have here is the other type of suspension, a suspended second. So this would be the root, this would be the second, and this would be the 5th. It's suspended on note 2 instead of 3, basically. So this last note of a turnaround makes an extension. If I show you by building the chord here, this becomes 1, 3, 5, 7th. It's a 7th extension on the last of our chord 6s there. Now all we do is bridge the jump from this melody note to this melody note with a passing note here. And what has that created? That has given us a suspended 4th on chord 1. Again, let's build the chord to show you. This is normal chord 1. We change that middle note from 3 above the root to 4. And that creates our suspended 4th. Let's not forget this riff has a second half. So the melody at the second time round falls down here. That's the same chord type as this. So these are suspended seconds. Basically a different voicing of a suspended second. I hope that makes sense now. full arrangement. Those melody notes are emphasized by this wobbly lead. Backed up by this guitar sounding synth. That's playing what we call power chords, the first and fifth notes of the chord, no third, and the piano riff we just programmed with a synth layer. Okie dokie, that's going to do it for today. I hope you learned something. If you did, you know what to do. Press some buttons or leave me a comment, or you can buy me a coffee from the link in the description. And until next week, I'll see you in the comments. Bye bye.